I don't see from the Biden administration or the Senate Democrats right now that are going to be looking at any sort of pro-growth policy, which, I think that the biggest pro-growth policy we could have right now is actually cutting government spending. We've got to find a way to rein in government spending, or this is going to continue to get out of control for the future, which will lead to more boom and bust cycles, which will more bust, I think, overall, but create even more problems with the Federal Reserve, our fiat currency system, with the value of the dollar, the de-dollarization that's going on across the globe. And we've got some major challenges, Bob. And I know that you and I are Christians. We have our faith in a higher power than that's here, but we both have kind of this calling, I think, to be able to explain these things to people to provide some way of prosperity, right? And I wonder if you were kind of king for the day or something. I know that's big because we don't want a big government, but what would be some of the key first things, and then we'll wrap up here, that you would put out there to say, look, this is where we need to be doing in order to get more prosperity and not go down this path of socialism and everything else?
Sure. Great question. So again, with the caveat that what would I do if I were president? I would resign, right?
Yeah.
All that stuff, but yeah, if the idea is if perhaps to phrase it, if the government and Fed officials are asking me for advice, maybe, and if I were to write a novel in which there's a turnaround where they didn't just all, become voluntarists and pacifists overnight, what would it look like with those caveats, folks? Yeah, I think a huge thing would be, for example, if the federal government just got rid of the income tax and they took everyone out of the IRS building and literally dynamited it. Again, took people out so no one gets hurt. Just to show Americans, no, we're serious. It's not that the next incoming administration is going to reinstate this. This is done. And then started slashing government spending. And so originally, the deficit would explode. But if they showed creditors around the world, no, look we really are structurally cutting spending very aggressively. Like maybe, $400 billion the first year and then $800 billion, cumulative by the next year and so on. Yeah. And just doing things like telling all these government employees, you don't need to come to work tomorrow. Like, people in the EEA, Department of Education, like all sorts of things. One thing is you could just go through and say, if your department's not in the Constitution, you're out of a job. But in terms of like easing the pain, or say, we'll still pay you your salary, and maybe based on, your history with your
tenure.
What's that called? Seniority or tenure. Like, oh, we'll pay you at your current rate for 6 months. And the critical thing is, if they go get another job, they still get paid whatever you said, right? You don't want them waiting to go work in the private sector. You want them going to the private sector right away. That's good. That's not bad. They're not double dipping.
Yeah.
And so you do that. So over time, the government spending on personnel just shrinks rapidly, but it'd be too shocking just to tell everyone you're out of work or we're not paying you if they had a whole career based on being a civil servant. So just doing that, I think, and then, so for the private people in the private sector originally, who now their tax rate went from whatever, on the margin, 45% down to 10% or something, there would be a huge explosion in economic activity. And so I think in terms of the conventional figures, you would see just, the expansion of private GDP would probably be growing at like 25% for the first few years, which would be, maybe the only thing that was right after World War II, you saw something like that. And then massive fire sale of government assets, right? The government is sitting on trillions of assets, real estate. They own the majority of like some land in the West, the U.S. government does. All kinds of mineral resources offshore, things they could open that up. So there's lots of assets the federal government could sell off in this intermediate period while they're waiting for spending to come down, and the remaining revenue is there's things, government revenue besides the income tax, right? The income tax was only instituted in the early 1900s, a modern form of it. So the government did get by without it beforehand. And I think that would be huge. And the central bank just let the bonds mature, right? Let those things roll off naturally and just let the balance sheet start shrinking. I would like them to ultimately just go towards just completely privatizing money and banking. Right. But in terms of, having the Fed do something in the meantime, just let the bonds mature and roll off and shrink that way.